Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right. Thank you for being with us for this event. My name is Brahima Coulibaly. I'm the Vice President of the Global Economy and Development Program that houses the Africa Growth Initiative led by Aloysius Odu. I'm really delighted that His Excellency Claver Gatete, the new UN Under-Secretary and Executive Secretary of UNECA, agreed to join us today to share his vision for UNECA in driving Africa's Sustainable Development Agenda. So thank you for being with us. So first, I can share with you some context. For those who don't know UNECA as well, it's Africa's premier development think tank and was founded in 1958 as one of the UN's 5 regional commissions. Its mandate is to foster intra-regional integration and to promote international cooperation for Africa's development. UNECA's 3 core functions include convenings that result in development policy frameworks, standards and action plans that reinforce multilateralism, and conducting high-quality research and analysis and operational policy advice in support of member states. And since its inception, UNECA has recorded many achievements. Let me just share with you a few of those. It played a key role in the establishment of the African Development Bank in 1964. Also, the founding of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, that's now been renamed African Union, and the establishment of the regional economic communities like ECOWAS, EAC, and SADC. UNECA provided intellectual leadership that underpinned Africa's economic community and the AU's Agenda 63, the Africa we want. At the time of the structural adjustment programs in the 80s, UNECA successfully urged the need for adjustment with a human face. And I think history is now recognizing that they had that spot on. It conducted studies, for example, on assessing regional integration in Africa, and provided technical guidance throughout the initial negotiation that led to the establishment of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, or AFCFTA. It continues to work closely with the African Union and the CFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, in implementation support. So UNECA and the AU's Africa CDC and the Africa Import-Export Bank played a critical role in securing vaccine and therapeutics during the COVID-19 pandemic. And as here at Brookings, we know we work very closely with UNECA during that time. There are, of course, many more accomplishments over the years. However, one element that stood out in UNECA's pivotal role in driving Africa's Sustainable Development Agenda is by championing an evidence-based, inclusive, and regional approach to Africa's policy formulation. The Commission has catalyzed positive change across the continent. And today, more than ever, the world faces a range of complex, interconnected challenges, and yet national interests, as well as the inadequacies of existing institutions, are hindering the effective global response. And the global fight against poverty, I believe, would either be won or lost in Africa. And we can't afford to lose it. And if we win this, it would be a tremendous potential and value addition to the global economy. UNECA's unique position as the only UN agency mandated to operate at both the regional and sub-regional level dictate that it will continue to play a critical role in building consensus to drive progress. So a very small task. Once again, Your Excellency, welcome to Brookings. And let me now turn it over to Aloysius for the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Bit tepid, right? Good morning. Good morning. Oh, that's much better. That's much better. Thank you very much, Ko. And thank you all for being here. It's an exceptionally busy week in the nation's capital. We know that you have so many opportunities to attend many things, but you chose to be here. So we, at the Africa Growth Initiative here at the Brookings Institution, we're very, very grateful that you could join us for today's event. I want to recognize the presence of the Deputy Chairperson of the AU, who's here with us, Dr. Monique Nzanzabangwa. Yeah, I hope I've pronounced that right. Thank you very much for joining us. This is very important for us to welcome you here. We also have the Deputy Executive Secretary, Dr. Hanan Morsi, who's also here with us. There are a few others in the front here, but I wanted to make sure that we capture their presence here. Here's what we're going to do. In a moment, His Excellency will make some remarks, and he has also very kindly agreed to respond as part of the Q&A to questions from the audience, and of course, many of our listeners from across the world, Africa and elsewhere, we really welcome you to this session as well. So he will respond to both questions from you and questions from the audience. For those online, we really urge you to send your questions to events@brookings.edu with the hashtag UNECA forward. UNECA forward is the key. So first, it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce His Excellency today, one of Africa's finest sons who has served his country loyally and effectively for many decades. Prior to his current appointment as Executive Secretary of UNECA and Under Secretary of the United Nations, Mr. Gatete was Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Rwanda to the United Nations in New York. Before that, he was Minister of Infrastructure. He was also Minister of Finance and Economy. And before that, he was Governor of the Rwandan Central Bank. And just in case you think that's not enough, he was Ambassador before all that to the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Iceland. So, Your Excellency, without further ado, I am so delighted you could join us here today. Please, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Ibrahim Akoribare, Vice President and Director, Global Economy and Development, the Brookings Institution, Mr. Rosias Odu, Senior Fellow and Director, Africa Growth Initiative at Brookings Institution, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be with you today to discuss how we can scale up efforts to deliver on the African Union Agenda 2063 and the Sustainable Development Goals. I thank the Brookings Institution, particularly the Africa Growth Initiative, for this opportunity. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, while Africa continues to exhibit remarkable resilience against a series of shocks that it has not created, it is off the track to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Africa is the second fastest growing region in the world, but poverty and hunger have been rising over the past 5 years. At the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, we are well aware that a major preoccupation of many of the African governments is how to address the unrelenting debt, financial, and climate challenges. We have seen debt levels increase by over 180% since 2010. For Africa as a whole, public debt now amounts to 66% of GDP, and high repayment costs are crowding out essential expenditures on health, education, and climate action. In March of this year, at the ECA Conference of Ministers of Finance, Planning, and Development, African ministers called for alternative solutions to what they perceive as the failure of the global financial architecture to come through for Africa. Despite a projected growth of 3.5% in 2024 and 2.8% last year, growth is not high enough for Africa to fulfill the goals of the Agenda 2063. Complex global shocks have disrupted supply chains, eroded fiscal space, and reduced access to finance. 21 African countries are now at high risk of or in debt distress. Only 2 have their credit ratings in the investment grade, and those are Mauritius and Botswana. And 3 have already defaulted on their sovereign bonds. Moreover, the tax-to-GDP ratio remains at 15.8%, and inflation reached 18.3% last year. A lack of concessional borrowing is leaving African governments to decide whether to borrow at national level and crowd out private sector, or borrow externally and deal with the challenges of foreign exchanges and exchange rate fluctuations. Naturally, all this takes its toll on the most vulnerable. Based on the latest data, 476 million people in Africa are projected to live in poverty in 2024, about 50 million more before the COVID. Ongoing threats of climate change are reducing the fiscal space, costing governments up to 5% of GDP annually. Countries urgently need cheaper financing, but the continent is losing up to $75 billion because of high risk premiums and unfair credit assessments based on the recent UNDP analysis. Yet we know that we need up to $3 trillion a year until 2030 in development and climate financing to reach SDGs. For Africa, infrastructure and climate change is estimated to cost between $68 billion and $108 billion per year. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we are confronted with hard economic choices, but Africa still can generate its own solutions, and the ECA has a critical role to play, not least because Africa remains the region with an abundance of every kind of resource demanded for globally. It is for this reason that today I focus on the potential of the African Continental Free Trade Area that was signed in 2018. We see this as Africa's most ambitious initiative to move from a continent of potentials to a serious investment destination. Market size matters. There are recognized benefits that follow scale in economics. Africa's post-independence history can be described as a history of deliberate and sustained, if at times faltering, efforts to overcome economic fragmentation. And ECA has played a pivotal role in the establishment of every single major regional integration instrument, as mentioned before. I believe it is useful to mention the important milestones leading to the launch of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Excellencies, it is important to note that the idea of establishing a free trade area between the various African countries, and even the establishment of a common, this inaugural summit established the preparatory economic committee to study the issues of free trade area and a common external tariff. And the ECA was requested to work with governments on this study. However, Africa's 6-decade journey towards greater regional integration has not been without challenges. But let us remember that it took the European Union 25 years to establish a single market. And Africa has managed to start trading on the CFTA in just 5 years because of the solid foundations that countries built. In 1979, the 1979 Monrovia Summit of the Organization of African Unity, the 1980 Lagos Plan of Action, the 1991 Abuja Treaty that proposed the establishment of regional economic communities, the 2002 Constitutive Act that established the African Union, and the 2013 adoption of the Agenda 2063 among the shiniest landmarks on the long and winding road to integration. These efforts provided the building blocks for the launch of the CFTA in 2018 in Kigali, Rwanda, because we already had functioning regional economic communities. The single market creation on 21st March 2018 signaled to the world that the consolidation of a new independent state. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the vision of the CFTA is about progressively replacing the many small and fragmented national markets with a single continental-wide marketplace. Whichever way we want to look at it, it makes more economic sense to have seamless trading in one big market than to deal with over 800 bilateral investment treaties. When goods and services flow freely across borders, entrepreneurs take investment decisions with the knowledge that their products and services will be placed inside a single market of 1.4 billion people whose collective spending power is close to $3 trillion US. As investment increases, so do opportunities for creating jobs and raising the hopes and aspirations of young people. To use a term coined by my good friend and colleague, Ambassador Albert Muchanga, the African Union Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry and Minerals, I quote, with the CFTA in place, Africa is every entrepreneur's domestic market, end quote. Indeed, one of the greatest benefits of the full implementation of the CFTA is the resulting uniformity of standards and coherence of processes that in turn facilitate the creation of consistent and predictable policy environments. This can only be a good thing for attracting foreign direct investments. Furthermore, our recent estimates also point to the job creating and poverty and inequality reducing benefits of the CFTA across all countries, although with varying degrees. And Africa is making great strides in the implementation. 47 countries have ratified the agreement, representing 95% of Africa's GDP, 91% of the population, and 96% of the total intra-Africa trade. Phase 1 protocols on regulating trade in goods, trade in services, and dispute settlement entered into force in May 2019. Phase 2 protocols on investment, competition policy, intellectual property rights, digital trade, and women and youth in trade are being negotiated for entry into force. But more importantly, trading has commenced. We are now making gradual progress in what makes up intra-Africa trade. And yes, while unprocessed primary commodities still make up majority of the Africa's merchandise exports, internal trade is becoming more balanced. Over 40% of intra-Africa exports between 2017 and 2022 comprised of manufactured goods. There is consensus among all researchers and think tanks, including the World Bank and IMF, about the CFTA's potential to transform the African continent. The only difference among them lies on what the CFTA can contribute, but not on what CFTA can contribute, but on the magnitude and by how much. With these differences being the result of the type of institutional techniques that is applied by each of the institutions. ECA's latest empirical research shows that the most impressive economic benefits from CFTA implementation are expected to come from the intra-African trade. In relative terms, while overall intra-Africa trade would increase by about 35%, intra-Africa trade, specifically in agri-food services and industry, would grow by 50.2%, 37.6%, and 36% respectively in 2045, when compared to a situation without the agreement. Intra-Africa trade in energy and mining is also expected to increase by 19%, albeit substantially lower than the other sectors. Furthermore, ECA's research has shown that to meet the CFTA's transport and logistics needs, Africa requires about $500 billion investment by 2030. However, The process of implementation will improve infrastructure investments in transport corridors, and this is expected to boost intra-Africa trade in transport services by up to 25%. Excellencies, the world is also changing, and technology and artificial intelligence are at the heart of the global innovations. Connectivity and digitization, supported by a system of payment facilities, are now essential vehicles to trade and cross-border, to trade across the borders. Yet Africa lags behind the rest of the world on digital and technological capabilities. We all know the obvious data. Only 40% of total population is connected to the internet, compared to the global average of 66%. However, concerted effort to implement the CFTA will require a skills revolution underpinned by science, technology, engineering, and innovation. This, in turn, will yield significant benefits for innovation for a continent that currently only accounts for 0.1% of global innovation. With the right investments, young people equipped with digital skills will be able to tap into the artificial intelligence market, projected to reach 18 trillion by the year 2030. For example, small, micro, and medium-sized enterprises also stand to benefit. Digital trade is already making it easier for smallholder businesses with digital capacities to buy and sell goods. Therefore, protocol on digital trade becomes even more significant for SMEs, and we cannot overlook the fact that the implementation of the CFTA is an imperative for the economic diversification, industrialization, and boosting the competitiveness. Excellencies, the debate is no longer about the merits of the CFTA or a comparison of CFTA against other trading agreements. We know what it is, we know what to do. The most important question is the how to fast-track implementation. And indeed, implementation is the ultimate test for Africa's seriousness. This is because ultimately, implementation is primarily about the individual African governments to bring the national laws, administrative practices, and related processes into conformity with the requirements of the agreement. Let me now use the opportunity to say a few words on how we are supporting this goal of implementation. I want to preface this by underscoring that our work is to provide support to the African Union in its role as the continental leader on the African agencies. So for us at ECA, we are looking at how we do things differently and practically to implement the CFTA faster so that countries can leapfrog in development. First, through ECA support, 36 countries and 2 regional economic communities have developed and adopted respective national and regional CFTA implementation strategies. Second, I spoke earlier of the importance of a regional approach. Now I want to be more specific on the need to create more regional value chains. Regional initiatives offer scale that allows spillover benefits to multiple countries and entire sub-regions, as well as instruments that yield transformative outcomes. We are therefore scaling up support to countries on the development of regional value chains across the agriculture sector, livestock sector, energy, battery and electric vehicle industry, and the critical minerals sector, to mention but a few. For example, in Zambia and Zimbabwe, we are focusing support on the development of a common agro-park. When the impact of extreme weather events in agriculture is considered, initiatives such as this offer these countries the potential to be breadbaskets for the region and to address the critical issues of high food inflation and insecurities. With the governments of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia, we are advancing in the development of the battery and electric vehicles special economic zones. Africa is a major supplier of critical minerals needed for electric vehicles, wind turbines, solar panels, and other products. Our critical minerals have to work for our development agenda. Recent analysis by Bloomberg estimate that the battery and electric vehicles market is expected to reach 46 trillion by 2052. Therefore, together with DRC and Zambia and a coalition of regional partners, we have signed a memorandum of understanding to establish centers of excellence for battery manufacturing and cross-border special economic zones for mineral processing and battery manufacturing. In Botswana, we are working with the BADEA, the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, and the government to explore the expansion of the beef exports market. Currently, they export to Europe, and they are now moving to the Middle East for further exports, and that one benefits the entire region of the Southern Africa. In the Southern African Development Community, SADC, we are supporting the harmonization of the regulatory framework for regional power pools that will ultimately lead to local manufacturing, reduce costs, and enhance energy services across the SADC region, a region currently struggling with severe energy challenges. For these initiatives to work, partnerships are critical, and we work with regional partners such as the African Development Bank, the Afrexim Bank, African Union Development Agency, African Finance Corporation, BADEA, and others to maximize support to governments. Having said this, we do not overlook the challenges of attracting investments. This is another important area of ECA's work. The financing of large-scale interventions like these require private sector participation, but the business environment is often considered too risky. Thus, ECA is working with partners to enhance the de-risking mechanism that will offer the necessary investor market confidence. We know that the de-risking tools such as guarantees, power purchase agreements, and tariff inflation indexing can help. We are strengthening our capabilities to provide analytical support to countries so that there is a better understanding of the investment options and uncertainties facing investors around policy, regulatory, and legal frameworks. Our ultimate goal is to contribute to increasing the pipeline of bankable projects, especially in the areas of energy and infrastructure, to support intra-Africa trade. This goal is key for Africa as a continent, with the world's largest population in an age where other regions are grappling with aging. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the capability of the CFTA to transform Africa's development trajectory does not have to be a dream. A common African market is good for global business, and the CFTA strengthens the business fundamentals for investments on the continent. Ultimately, at the heart of whatever we do this week is the need to improve the dire economic and social conditions of our most vulnerable populations. Both Agenda 2063 and the SDGs urgently need to be back on track. For this to happen, we need economies of scale, regionalization, and replicability, and the CFTA can help to achieve this. A successful CFTA is a successful Africa, and a successful Africa can only be a force for global good. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, my brother. All right. Wow, that was quite a tour de force. Thank you very much.
Thank you
for your comprehensive coverage of the current status and what to look forward to in our continent. You alluded to the AU's Agenda 2063, of which the intellectual behind it has been the UNECA in terms of formulating it, the Africa we want. So what is UNECA doing right now in terms of making sure we can actually actualize that vision?
Yeah, thank you very much. First thing first, we have to understand that this is the agenda of the heads of states on the African continent. And the heads of state have established the African Union Commission to assist in driving the whole entire agenda and working together with the member countries of the African Union. Our job as the UN Economic Commission for Africa is to support that process, to work with African Union, their commissions, and also to work with member countries. And that's why you have a conference of ministers of finance, development, and economic planning. And to do that, we provide support directly to the member countries in terms of the capacity and working with them. And that's why we are talking about the implementation, the CFTA strategies, where we have supported 36 countries, and also supporting the regional economic communities. Right. There are 8 of them. So far, we have supported 2, and we are working with others to make sure that they can implement those kind of strategies. So we provide all the economic advice to the member countries, but also work with the African Union commissions in terms of discharging their duties. For example, we are one of the knowledge partners for the African Union for the G20. Okay. We are working with them to make sure that we actually support them for Africa to be well represented. We work also, recently we were consulted by South Africa also as a knowledge partner to make sure that we can also assist them in terms of preparing the chairmanship of the G20 coming next year.
No, that's great. Yeah. Thank you for that.
And among some of the things that we do is actually this time, when you see the African continent and the challenges that we are having, it's no longer macroeconomic management or doing some few things here and there in every country. That's why we chose looking at it from a regional perspective. Last week I was in Botswana, and we were looking at the whole entire value chain for the beef, but also the value chain for the diamond, the minerals, where we think that Southern Africa has a big chance. And we are trying to see what we can do so that what we do in one country can have a spillover effect into other countries. That's why we went also to discuss with Botswana, Zambia and Zimbabwe to see, and now we've got the resources that we are going now to undertake that kind of study and be able to have an agro park that's very useful. We'll be going to West Africa for cocoa, definitely. We are going to other places also for beef and other commodities to make sure that the value chain adds value at every level until the final end. And that's why we are studying these areas which are very critical. Energy, critical minerals, agriculture, and so many other areas that we are looking at to make sure that these ones could be actually the mover of the whole regions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You touched upon the African Continental Free Trade Area a great deal in your remark. And we were privileged to have Honorable Wamkele Mene here also last week to also share his perspective as head of the African Continental Free Trade Area. I wanted to find out from you, what does UNECA's own research say about the potential impact of this particularly important continental initiative?
You know, we've had the regional economic communities, 8 of them. And that was the way of the building blocks, so that initially you could trade in the region. There are 8 of them.
Yes.
And they have really done a great job in terms of encouraging the trade among those regions which they represent. This was a very good building block for the establishment of one market. But you understand that ever since we started even having these regional economic communities, our trade among the Africans has never gone beyond 15%. No. It has always been less than 15%. And yet, most of the other countries, like Europe and Asia, they are trading above 60%. And this is not acceptable. We cannot stay just in the regions. We need to be one block. And that's why there are these kind of decisions which have been taken to make sure that we create one market, one customs union, and then at that point, then it is going to encourage. But there's a lot that needs to be done. You need infrastructure. Yes. You need to remove tariff and non-tariff barriers. You need to do other things. And maybe the decision, the political will, is the most important. And here I will tell you the story where really the power of the political will becomes very important. When I was the Minister of Finance in Rwanda, we had a challenge of really the exports and imports, they go through Mombasa and Dar es Salaam. But on that northern corridor of Kenya at Mombasa, the travel was taking about 21 days to Rwanda, and then 18 days to Uganda, 22 days to Bujumbura, in terms of that corridor. The president of Rwanda did something unusual. He put some people on the track to see what was happening and what was wrong. So then they went through, and then when they came back, he called for a summit of the heads of state in the Northern Corridor. We know that Uganda was there, Kenya was there, we had South Sudan, we had also Ethiopia. He presented to them, he says, Uganda, you have this number of roadblocks. You have this number of weight bridges. This is how long it takes at the border for you to cross. Every trader has to have 3 insurance in Kenya, in Uganda, and in Rwanda. And then also the people are not allowed to do the customs clearance and so forth. So they took important decisions which are very, very critical. They say removed all the roadblocks across the entire Northern Corridor. They removed the weight bridges, and they were left with only 2 at the entry and exit.
Right.
And for the trucks, they were not allowed to be stopped at the border. They had the cargo tracking system, meaning you can track it from Mombasa to wherever it goes. They also removed the roaming charges so that people can now be able to trade. They removed the 3 insurances. They said use the COMESA insurance, the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa, which reduced the whole entire cost. They actually also removed the use of the passports. They said you can use your local IDs. In 1 week, everything changed completely. The trucks from Mombasa to Kigali took 4 to 5 days instead of 21 days. And we saw the turnaround effect to the economy was incredible. And this is the power of political will.
Absolutely.
So now they are removing, many countries are now removing the visas, that you get visa on arrival. They are removing so many other non-tariff barriers, which are very, very important. And slowly by slowly, we are building up the market, where goods and services can be able to flow from one country to another freely. And that's going to really bring that ratio of 15% upwards, so that we can trade among ourselves, but also not trading just among ourselves in terms of primary commodities. We want to add value, and that's why industrialization becomes very critical.
This is fantastic. In fact, the more you talked about that corridor, which I had the privilege of traveling through, as you know, many times when I was a staff member of the African Development Bank, and it's really good to see that the Rwandan approach to visa on arrival is beginning to spread. And Kenya announced recently that you can come from anywhere and get visa on. I mean, this is really great, great developments in the region. I wanted to turn now to our world, because our Vice President, Brahima Coulibaly, mentioned the current global situation we face in the world. We have so much fracture. In the old days, it used to be that cooperation was the way forward. Increasingly now, we have very uncooperative world as we go forward. And the continent is really, for us in the continent, this is at stake. I was just wondering your views, especially on the current debate of the reform of the international financial architecture. How do you see it? You alluded to it in your speech, but if you can touch upon it a little bit more for us. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. It's very important that you are bringing this point. Because these systems, the global international financial architecture that we use today, where we have the Bretton Woods institutions and others, it was set up in 1945. When most of our countries were not yet born. So you could imagine the countries that were there at the present, at that time, were the ones benefiting from that. Everybody came in later on, and we had to fit in the current system, whereby you have the current African countries. I don't know where to start, but the current system is such that the developing world is depending on these institutions, because our own governments, most of them, are not even rated. 21 of them are not rated. And we have only 2 investment grade, as I mentioned. Now, others are poorly rated. And for you to drive economic development, you need to make sure that you can borrow from outside, you can borrow from inside the country. But we have challenges. It's not only the countries which are not rated, but also our banking system is poorly rated. So, meaning they have no access to the global international market. So, for those countries, if the interest rate or the money that they trade is dependent on the deposits that people put there, The long-term resources are not there.
No.
Most of them don't have stock exchanges. So you can now imagine when the country issues the bonds to borrow, they are crowding out the private sector.
Absolutely.
The private sector has no resources. If it is there, it is expensive for them. And if you borrow from outside, then you would only prefer to borrow at concessional rate,
Of course.
at long-term resources. The World Bank used to have the 43 years, 40 to 43 years, 0.75% interest. And that was good. But then you find that the either resources are not enough as countries have grown and they need more money. And that becomes now a problem.
Yeah.
Where do you go beyond the concessional lending? The alternative would be to issue a Eurobond.
Yeah.
But because you are risky, the cost is very high. And this adds on the debt situation. And that's why you see the debt situation now affecting many countries. And just to tell you how painful it is that there is an issue of foreign exchange because you pay back in foreign exchange, in dollars, in euros, in yen, and in other currencies. Now, to do that, you are drawing down again on the reserves. And the IMF will tell you there's a red line. The 4 months of imports of your reserves should stay in the central bank. What do? You are looking at that red line, and at the same time, you need to spend money to import goods and services because you are still investing in the capital, investing in your own country.
Right.
Now, how do you develop without buying goods from outside, especially for the roads, for energy, for other infrastructure that is required? And that way it is squeezing them. Because on one hand, you want to implement the SDGs that we all want. On the other hand, the amount of money that we pay for the servicing the loan is bigger than the budget for health, for education, for social safety nets, for even the normal running of the government. So now it becomes chicken and egg. What do you do? What don't you do? And now it has become more complicated.
Yes.
Because the G20 common framework is not functioning. For all of us, we know that for the countries that used to have such a problems, you would go to the Paris Club, you sit down, actually you sit outside, they take decisions, and you go back and tell them I was negotiating when you didn't. And then you go there, but at least they solve your problem. But now, we don't even have only the Western countries. There are newcomers. We have China, we have India, we have Turkey, we have the Arab funds, and then in addition to that, we have the private lenders.
Yes.
How do you put all of them together in one house and negotiate how to address the issues of the debt?
Yeah.
That's why so many countries are not really benefiting from this. And that's why we need to fix it, because you have to relieve them of the debt, and at the same time, we have to provide concessional resources to assist them, because they're in a difficult situation, especially after the war in Ukraine and what's going on in the Middle East. It's really costing them a lot. The food prices are going up, the inflation is going up. So how do you manage the situation? Yesterday, when you were in a meeting, I wanted to say that it's not just a competition of the ministers of finance and governors on who is aging faster, because of the problems that we are facing. Because it's a challenge when you are managing this.
Yes.
You are the Minister of Finance, you are looking at the fiscal side, at the real sector, balance of payments, and the monetary side. How do you deal with your macro situation when you are facing these kind of problems that are coming in every day? Your currency really takes a good beating when you're dealing with kind of situations.
And we've seen a number of currency collapses on the continent. So the point you mentioned on the rating of African economies is really a point well taken. Here in the spring meeting, as many people here may recall, we had a number of African finance ministers and central bank governors to talk about the impact of the poor rating of African economies in terms of how it affected them. I was left with a particular remark that our brother Ken Ofori, Honorable Ken Ofori, former Minister of Finance in Ghana, and he basically compared the idea, Ghana borrowed $1 billion, from the euro-dollar market. Greece borrowed $1 billion from the euro-dollar market. By the time both countries finish paying, Greece will pay back $1.5 billion over 30 years. And Ghana will pay $2.5 billion over 30 years for the same initial 1 billion. So I really can, I can relate to what you're saying, because those are the sort of challenges that I hate to be a finance minister right now of an African country because of the sleeplessness. But let me show.
Maybe I can say that the sustainability of this,
right.
There's no country that can depend on outside world forever.
No.
So the domestic resource mobilization matters.
Absolutely.
We've been talking about it, but we don't go into the details of what we mean by the domestic resource mobilization. Yeah. What do we do to address the issues that have been pertinent in terms of the taxation and the loopholes within the tax system? How do we fix it? And so that we can really specify what is required to be done.
Absolutely.
But also investment in any country is not only government, it is also the private sector. How do we build the capital market that can provide long-term resources for any country? So if we can combine the two, we can deal with the short-term issues of financing, but eventually we need to address the issues of domestic resource mobilization.
In fact, I can see my boss here shaking his head already, because this is an area that here at the African Growth Initiative at Brookings, with prior work he had done before he became VP, and most of what we've been doing, I think is so, so important for a number of reasons, as you outlined. First of all, you talked about the challenges of concessionality. The donor countries themselves, who are the sources of concessional finance, are having tremendous fiscal challenges of their own. So the idea that concessional money is, ADF, African Development Fund, IDA, it is uphill going forward. That doesn't excuse them from putting more money, but we need to recognize that concessional financing is very, very tight, which raises the point that you've just absolutely elucidated on. We have no choice. No country on the planet has ever become developed if they don't raise 30% of their development financing through domestic resource mobilization. We're stuck at this 16.5 on our continent, and many countries below 10. It really is a big one. So I'm glad that as the head of UNECA, this is something you're also pushing, because domestic resource mobilization is absolutely fundamental to the future.
Sure.
Thank you. Before we turn to the audience, you alluded to the Conference of African Finance Ministers, Planning and Economic Development. I believe it's the 56th session in Zimbabwe last month. You've been a busy man already in the few months you've taken this job. So in that conference, what, from your point of view, were the main takeaways when you assembled with your peers in Zimbabwe?
So I think the first thing first is that the countries are so disparate, and they are facing problems which are different from the previous ones. Let me just pick the example of climate.
Okay.
We're in Zimbabwe. It's a very dry country now. Zambia is very dry. Malawi is very dry. And they are facing big challenges.
Yes.
Either you have the drought or you have the floods.
Yes.
And some countries it has cost them a lot. You saw that the estimate now is up to 5% of your GDP cost on climate. And for Mozambique, when they had a cyclone, it went up to 15%. It was very, very serious. And these are shocks that are coming in addition to already the problems that you're having. How do you deal with it? So they were challenging us. They were saying, yes, you are the organization that is supposed to help us. We talk about green bonds. We talk about the blue bonds. He said, how do you help us?
Yes.
How do we sell our carbon? And that was a big issue, because they were saying their carbon is being sold at less than $5 per ton, whereas it is more than 100 in other regions. And the same carbon. And they were saying, what do we need to do? And that's why we assist them to really develop their own registries. We started working at the regional level, the Congo Basin, which has 16 countries, and Morocco together, and now went to the island states.
Okay.
And the next one is going to be the Sahel region, also about 17 countries, so that we can harmonize their registries, and then from there they know what the contents are in terms of how to negotiate in the carbon. Now, the next step will be how to really trade this on a stock exchange. so that we can develop the capacity around that.
Yes.
Because developing a capacity around each of the countries is very complicated. So we want to make sure that we do this. But they are saying we don't have alternatives.
No.
We talk about innovative financing, we don't see it. Our debts are too high, and the common framework is not assisting us.
Not very common.
It's not very common. And we are looking for financing concessional resources, we don't see it.
No.
We heard about the 100 billion of climate, we are not accessing it.
No.
Who is going to help us? So they were so desperate, and that's why they are thinking of what are the innovations?
Yes.
What are other countries doing so that we can also copy and be able to do the same in our own countries? And that's why the really domestic resource mobilization becomes very, very important.
Absolutely, absolutely. You guys have been just so patient. I'd like to turn over to you, Nancy. Questions. Please make sure you say who you are, where you are affiliated, and of course, make sure there's a question mark at the end of your remark. I think you are very fast in raising your hand. Can we have
Hello, Excellency. Thank you very much, Boss Aloysius. Thank you for sharing your words of wisdom with us. The question that I have, by the end of 2024, what will be the top priority that you'll be proud of having achieved? So I know we have multiple priority, many moving parts, but if there's a single achievement that you like to, for which you like to have a legacy for 2024. Thank you.
Great. Let's take, we'll try and make sure we balance, there's gender balance demands that I go this way, right? There is one hand here, that's right, and then we'll go to you guys.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Belinda Archibald, so I'm a fellow here at Brookings. One of the things that you mentioned, and I think UNECA also has a report on this, is on the sovereign credit ratings, right? And there's this idea that, which I've heard amongst my fellow African economists, right, that it's the way the kind of the ratings are treated very unfairly towards African countries. So I wonder, so this question of the broader question of the political economy, if you will, of the sovereign credit ratings is, I think, lurking in the background of many policymakers, economists, stakeholders' minds. In your opinion, to what extent does this idea of the kind of, how opaque the ratings are, potentially how subjective they are to African nations, potentially, issues of unfairness towards African nations, is this a big issue or is it an issue at all when you consider the kind of assessment of risk in African countries, read the sovereign credit ratings? Right. So since you mentioned that and I saw the reports, I was very curious to hear your opinion on that.
Right. Let's take the gentleman there. I'll come to you guys next, but the gentleman here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Ta Wongbe. I am a member of parliament in Liberia. I'm also a member of the ECOWAS parliament, and thank you for recognizing what we've been doing in West Africa. When we talk about trade and movement and regional integration, I believe West Africa has been doing such a good job with trying to push that. However, recently while I was in Abuja for the ECOWAS parliament, we saw something interesting happen where folks started to look at Cape Verde because of border. They trade more with Portugal than with West Africa. What do you think currency, language, and borders, how would that interplay with the CFTA? One of the things that we look at, even within ECOWAS Parliament, is that when time for voting, we saw regional people come together. The French came together to vote for their black. We had the Anglophone came together to vote for their black. And then we had people who spoke Portuguese, Guinea-Bissau, and others of the world. So I believe that currency, language, borders will somehow impact, even within ECOWAS, we only have 12% around that about in terms of intertrade. So what do you think that will look like on the broader sense of things? Thank you.
Very good question. When you mentioned Cape Verde, I thought you were going to allude to the fact that they were a giant killer during the AFCON that took place in Cote d'Ivoire. Your Excellency, those three questions on top priority 2024, sovereign rating, and of course our parliamentarian from Liberia.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really, that's a tough one, the top priority, because everything is a priority. Yeah. We don't know what you're going to achieve, but what you are trying to prove is like the proof of concept.
Yeah.
Many times we have had honorary governments being the leader in terms of development.
Yeah.
We need to bring in the private sector. But as you know that from most countries, we have been competing among ourselves by providing the incentives. But the return on what we are providing, the tax exemptions, the tax holidays, we've been competing on that. And without measuring maybe what are we getting in return. But I think one of the most important things that we see is how do we de-risk these programs. The private sector will invest an amount of money, and they have excess. But they are not participating as much in terms of development because of that risk, which we need really to address.
Yes.
And let me just again give you maybe an example of the water. One of the projects when I was the Minister of Infrastructure was to distribute the water within the city of Kigali because population has increased several times, and then we need to revamp and bring in the pipes and other things and then generate. So we had to bring in the private sector. We said we cannot generate the water and then supply it. It's very expensive. So what we did was to make sure that we divide the labor. The generation would be done by private sector and then supply the government utility, which is, of course, has the guarantee of the government. So there was no risk. They went and did the generation. The governments now did the flooding infrastructure, the reservoirs, and the rest of it. And at that point, the private sector ended up paying 2/3 of the cost because you have taken, there's no risk.
Yes.
And we had to help the private sector with ADB, with the World Bank, and say, lend them because they are doing business with government.
Yes.
So this time, they got from the private sector concessional window, cheaper money, and the end result was a lower price.
Right.
So that way then we are sharing in terms of the investment. Now, we want to make sure that as we develop these agro parks, we want to make sure that we also de-risk so that the private sector can invest their money without thinking about risk. And once there is no risk, you don't need to beg them.
No.
They will come. But we want to prove that this one can work.
Yes.
Secondly, we are working on technology. Technology is a big one really for the development of Africa. I was surprised that there are many initiatives that has been done in terms of using the artificial intelligence, and we are seeing so many products on the African continent which can be shared with other countries, and we want to help them in terms of that. But also the most important one is how to deal with the issue of climate, which we're working to make sure that by the end of the year, we'll have made a significant difference in terms of really making progress and working with the African Union Commission in terms of dealing with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad
the sovereign rating, I have, when I was Minister of Finance, worked with Fitch Rating, worked with Moody's, Standard & Poor, and then we discussed in terms of details. There is a problem because you are the country institution that understands the local environment and what you do and the predictions and all that. When someone from outside comes to your country and telling you, no, I think I know better than you, and this is how things should be, it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
It becomes a problem, and then whatever they write on their paper is what the whole world will go by. And then you wonder, you went to the same universities, studied the same economics, you are now practicing it, only that you are better because you know the environment better than them, and they are the ones to determine how you survive, how you look like from outside. There is a problem. I think we can work together to fix that, but I think there is a problem.
The urgency is there.
I don't want to go into the details, but the word, it's not fair.
No.
Finally, I just don't want to, I didn't understand very much your question, but I wanted just to say that one of the problems that we have on the African continent is foreign exchange.
Yes.
If you go to any country, they will tell you have a problem with foreign exchange. And that's why, together with the support of the Afrexim Bank, they've really been working on the continental-wide payment and settlement system,
the PAPSI,
so that we can be able to pay in the local currencies as we trade with each other. And by the way, once you are trading and there's a benefit, the language doesn't matter.
No.
I think the trade speaks the same language. It doesn't matter whether you speak French or English or any, as long as there is a deal, it speaks louder.
Yeah.
What we need is how to encourage this one and be able to use our central bank system and then scale it up so that we can trade among ourselves using our own local currency.
Yeah.
And that problem with the Forex would not be there. So this is really a game changer as we move forward.
Absolutely. You heard it from here. No more a francophone, anglophone, lusophone. We have one PAPSI, the payment system from the Afro-Asian Bank. For those who want to read more about PAPSI, please check out Foresight Africa. Last year's edition, there was a brilliant piece on that particular payment system. Let's turn to, I owe you two, your hands were up. Yeah, and then we'll see.
Thank you. I'm Ge Fei Zhou. I'm a grad student at Johns Hopkins SAIS. My question is, how do UNECA measure the impacts of its work in advancing Agenda 2060 and in SDG 2030? And also, could you elaborate a bit, what's the division of labor between AU and UNECA in providing technical assistance and economic policy guidance to member countries? Thank you.
Great, good questions. Yeah, you there.
Thank you so much. My name is Moses from the UN Foundation. My question, I think, is a stretch from what she asked regarding the rating agencies, and I'd like to sort of be more narrow and focus on the interest rate payments. Currently, many African countries pay about 10% of their revenues to interest payments. Currently, many African countries pay about 10% of their revenues for interest payments on sovereign debt. 7 countries currently pay more than 20% of the revenues to interest rate payments on their debts. And I think it's a fair conclusion to say that these rating agencies are biased against African countries. And I think we should discuss more on what ought to be done in order to address that challenge. There's been a lot of discourses on the problem, and I feel like we are now admiring the problem and not addressing the solutions. So I'm just curious to know what your office, sir, is doing together with your partners and AU to address that issue. Because if we don't talk about the solutions, then very soon we'll be seeing countries paying more than 30% of their revenues on interest payments. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think we have one last one here. The young lady over there. Sure. Great, thank you.
Hello, my name is Blaine Mamo. I am a senior advisor to the Horn of Africa Initiative, which is a platform of ministers of finance of the Horn of Africa, as well as development partners like the World Bank, African Development Bank, and the European Union. Okay. My question is about my former job, actually, as a deputy CEO of Sovereign Wealth Fund in Ethiopia. Your Excellency, you mentioned earlier that there are opportunities in Africa, especially with concessional loans and resource mobilization. There is this thinking of leveraging assets of Africa through sovereign wealth funds. And we've seen it in the Gulf. We have sovereign wealth funds in the UAE and other regions, also in Asia, leveraging their assets and turning them into investments, like the Qatar Investment Fund, et cetera. I'd love to pick your brain about your thinking around sovereign wealth fund and developing them in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. 3 very, very good questions, diverse also.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me start with the last one.
Yes.
There is a problem that we have all had before. In as much as we are looking for money from outside that is concessional, we are keeping our own money outside.
Yes.
As you know, if you're in the central bank governor, you keep your money ramp here in the World Bank. You keep them in the AAA rating of the banks in the West. And then you find even what you have, you are keeping there, you are keeping it outside, and it's not benefiting you. Pension funds are also kept outside because they have to be kept safe.
Yeah.
But I think the reason is because they don't have a facility of de-risking so that you can be able to deploy these resources. And that's why we are saying the pension funds, the sovereign wealth funds, which the amount is really increasing significantly. Many countries now deploying them. And that's why we are saying we are actually organizing one with these kind of institutions to see what we can do. What do you need for us to do so that you can invest your money on the continent? And the money is really increasing significantly. So if you take these resources and you take the philanthropy resources together, and you create a framework where both of them can be invested on the continent, they are bigger than what we are getting from these institutions that we keep talking about. The point that you are making is exactly what we are planning to do to see how this money and others from outside can be able to be deployed. And sometimes using our own sovereign wealth funds to leverage other sovereign wealth funds because the investment environment is now becoming less risky. So that way they are more comfortable, and it's only on the African continent that they can make profit. Yes, than elsewhere. Elsewhere there's not much profit that they are making. So on this one, we're very happy to work with you because it's an area that we are putting a lot of work into. The issue of the debt payments, so this is dependent on how you are rated. And if you are rated poorly, then you get a higher cost, really, for this. That is as simple as that. And they don't look at you politically. They just depend on the work that Moody's does, Standard & Poor, and then they look at the Fitch rating, and they say, this is who you are. If you are highly risky, then it can even go beyond 10%. It's no longer 10%. So there's no political decision. They just look at the numbers and they say, oh, I have read your rating. Yeah, you don't look good. Yes, and that's why they say, we were one in 2013, we issued a bond, a Euro bond. And I remember I was one of the people who went to New York, went to Boston, went to Los Angeles, and others went to Europe and elsewhere, and then we put the whole thing together. And then from there, they can tell you, some of the people, they say, I like what I see, others, I don't like what I see, and then from there, they can determine your price. And that's how you look like, but the rating agency becomes very important. The policies that you do are very important. Your plan is very important. They look at several things all at once, and that's how they judge you. But when they look at a rich country, they will say, oh, no, this is a rich country. They are safe. They're okay. So 2%, 1%, that would be okay. But for you, they will tell you 15%, actually 10, 8, 9. That's how they rate you. Unfortunately, that's the way the world is. And changing it takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And for the UNECA, there is a lot of problems. And we look at the SDGs. We are having Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development next Wednesday, where we bring in all the development ministers. We work with the African Union in terms of doing that. And we'll be discussing where we stand with SDGs, where do we stand with other development areas, including the Agenda 2063. Now the African Union has completed the first 10 years of the 50 years, and we are starting this year the new 10-year program. They have their own program, and once they present it, then we come in as partners. And I just have to emphasize what I said at the very beginning. We are coordinated by the African Union Commission. We come in as partners. They set the big lines, and then we come in with the technical expertise to work with them and also to work with member countries. And working in a coordinated manner helps in terms of the implementation, so that we don't work in a very ad hoc way. And there are many agencies in the UN system. There are many other partners. There are banks. There are the African Union institutions. The more we work in a coordinated manner, the more we can have a bigger impact. And that's how we prefer working together with them. And that really makes sense, but it also helps the continent to take stock of what we are doing and what we can even improve in the different areas. And that's why we work together. It's not just ECA working just separate on something else, another working on something else. And we are really focusing on how we complement each other, how we work together as partners.
That's fantastic. I think I know time is up, just to squeeze in one question from online participants. There is Etigistu Ashengo. How is the UNECA tapping into and enabling the capacity development of Africa's youthful and growing population. Very interesting and pertinent one.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have a huge forum for the Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development for the youth. They must have a voice, and the youth being very important, it's now, I think, 42%, is expected to be 42% of the global youth population by 2030.
Okay.
Meaning that almost 1 in 3 is going to be, 1 in 2 is going to be an African. Now, that is very serious business, meaning that we need to empower the youth. The youth have to have a role in everything that we talk about.
Right.
Because in the future, Africa is going to be on high demand. As you see the aging population, Africa's youth is now growing up. And there is a projection that goes up to almost close to 50. The minimum is 42% by 2030. So you can imagine what that means in terms of the empowerment, in terms of engaging them in science, technology, engineering, and all that. And then everything that we are trying to do here for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, in the industries, the work that we need to do in terms of de-risking the regional value chain, the critical minerals, the energy, and all that, it requires science, it requires technology, it requires the young people to get now interested now and be trained for the jobs of the future.
Yes, indeed.
And that's why the whole entire process of empowering them is very, very critical. And African Union is focusing on that. And we are supporting them. And this year is the year of education.
Yes.
And one of the areas is that, so which is very, very critical. So the role of the youth is not just to sit there and wait, but it's to get involved and also have their own voice.
Yeah.
That's why next week there is a whole session that is focusing on the youth.
Right.
So for to see how we achieve our Agenda 2063, but also the Sustainable Development Goals.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I think if anybody had any doubt about the role of the youth, Senegal demonstrated that very clearly. Your Excellency, thank you very, very much for joining us today. Thank you. We appreciate your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you.
A round of applause. All right. Communications, from Global Communications, AGI team, of course. Thank you all very much for making this moment.